script is long. Hey team, it's Mia, Leah, and recently I've been getting into Blender a lot. It's not something that I have a whole lot of experience in, but I don't know, I've been getting creative and I've been getting inspired, and it's been a really nice break from just like working a 9 to 5 every day. So today I wanted to share with you a little project that I would have been doing and sort of talk you through my process a little bit. So how to Frank. Today's project is one that was inspired by a song. I can't play the song for you because YouTube, which is really upsetting, but open up a new tab or open up Spotify or Apple Music and listen to Jet Set Ratio by Een Glish, because that was the whole inspiration behind this. I kind of stumbled upon Een Glish a little while ago. I think it was like a Spotify recommendation, but I really dig her production style. Like, it's really bouncy, it makes me want to bop my head. It's like cool, it's light, it's exactly my type of music, and I went, let's make my own custom album cover using the song's vibe as like inspiration. I wanted to make it a GIF because I've been getting into that. I know it's not really congruous with the whole album cover thing, but GIFs are cool, so whatever, I'm doing that. Cry about it if you want. I started by gathering some inspiration, just kind of getting like a vibe mood board going, and one of the things that kind of came out of nowhere but that really inspired me was I was looking at TikToks with my wife, and we stumbled across this crusty, ugly Spice Girls PlayStation game. I shouldn't call it ugly, I actually really liked it, but it's got these really unique models that are like kind of chibi-esque, very late 90s, and I thought it was cool, so I took kind of inspiration from that. Another thing that really kind of set the tone for me was I thought of Wii Sports Resorts, specifically this basketball court, because I don't know if you've listened to the song. You should. If you haven't, I'm serious, go listen to the song. But it gives me like street basketball vibes, like, you know, like I can imagine like a music video or something to that. I don't have to explain this to you. That's what I got from it. I got street basketball. I shouldn't swear. And the last set of sort of inspiration images I got were just pictures of Een herself. There are a couple of different Een Glish outfits. I'm not gonna lie, my favorite one is probably this brown leather jacket one. I think it's really sickening. But this red one is used more often and also looks way easier to model. And guess what? I'm allowed to make things easier for myself. I'm still learning, so whatever, go to hell. The red one also had a reference image from the back in one of the YouTube shorts, which was wicked convenient because I didn't want to have to just like imagine it. Next up was actually starting to model Een herself. I started, as I almost always do, with a round cube. A round cube is not a Blender default, I believe. You have to go and select it from like preferences, but it's so handy. If it's anatomical modeling, I almost always start with a round cube. Turn it on if you haven't. And I put that reference image of the spicy ladies in the background, just so I could use that as a reference to start getting the body all formed. This is a fun tip in case you ever want to like do this. I know that Blender has support for importing an image as a plane, which will make it like another physical object. I much prefer importing the image as an empty. And the reason that I do that is because if you import the image as a plane and then you go to like X-ray view, it's going to make the image X-ray view as well. But importing it as an empty doesn't have that problem. You can model in X-ray and the image will still show up behind it. So there's my little hot tip for the day. I also used round cubes to start doing the arms and the legs and the torso, just kind of pushing and pulling the vertices until I got a shape that I'm generally happy with. You'll notice that I'm doing this all from the front because that's where my reference image is. There's every chance that when I look at it from the side it's going to be wonky, but that is way easier to fix up later than I think going like back and forth and just trying to work on both at the same time. The next step is UV mapping, which is something that I didn't actually have a lot of experience with at all, but it is super important. It's literally vital. You can't texture without it. So what you'll notice is I'm using this really funky UV grid texture, which I just found online. I'll put a link to it in the description. But then what you do is you can apply that as a texture and then do your UV unwrapping. And if anything looks wonky on the UV map, it's going to look wonky in the texturing, so you can just adjust that. Blender has some really good UV wrapping tools that just kind of work on their own. Smart UV Project is really good. For more complex shapes like the head and the torso, you are going to need human intervention. But for the arms, I could pretty much just UV a Smart Projector and it would be fine. As long as it looks fine on the grid, as long as there's not warping or any funkiness going on, you're going to be all right to start texturing. I need to change the camera battery. It's been 45 seconds. Are you kidding? Next up, texturing. I have mixed feelings about texturing. I guess the first thing I want to say is don't take this as advice. This is one of the things I learned through this project is that I would have done this differently. But what I did was I exported all of the UV maps into just a PNG and I opened them up in Photopea because Photopea fucking rocks. Shout out Photopea, fuck Adobe, all my homies hate Adobe. I did the basic texturing of Ian's signature white stripes and the rest of the outfit as well. And again, this is something that in retrospect, I probably would have done in Blender's texture painting mode first and then cleaned it up in Photopea instead of starting in Photopea, but whatever, either way we get there. A fun fact about me is that I cannot draw yet. So basically when it came to the eyes and the mouth and everything, I just copied them from the texture. I know it's a bit of an easy way out, but it would have been significantly uglier if I did it any other way. I then took these textures, put them back into Blender and cleaned them up a little bit. I'm using the texture painter, which I mentioned earlier. I made sure the seams lined up and made sure everything was actually in place before taking them back into Photopea because I wanted to use, instead of solid colors, some textures. So I just stole a jean texture, just from a picture of jeans. And then I also, for the top and the shoes, I had this cool idea where just based off the color, I wanted to use the rubber, dodgeball texture. I thought that would be cool, so I did. And yeah, it is pretty cool. I'm happy with how that came out. I then fed all of my textures into, what's it called? I gotta remember the name. SLK Image to Pix, which is in fact the best program that exists. What's his name? Captain 4LK, I think it is. Yeah, shout out to Captain 4LK for making literally the best program. It does dithering and it does color palettes and it's awesome. It would be, I would give you a big kiss. I would give you a bigger kiss if I had batch functionality, but that's not a problem yet. That's a bit of foreshadowing for you. Pixelating your textures this way does sometimes mean that the UV map kind of gets jagged. I'll show it here, but once you don't have as smooth edges anymore, you can sometimes get the corners. If you get that, it's fine. Just go back to UV mapping and drag the corners in a little bit so it all lines up again. Rigging. This is kind of my enemy in that, well, not my enemy, I just don't know if this is how it's supposed to be done. But what I did for rigging was I took the default human meta rig from Blender and just kind of slapped it on top of my model, adjusted the arms and legs so it more fit with my model, and then I just parented using automatic weights. That's the way where Blender kind of guesses what needs to go where and how much. It kind of works. I mean, it works well. It works really well for what it is. It's your computer guessing. But I don't know how to rig manually yet. So that's what I did. It works well. I can move the arms and legs around. There's some kind of weird artifacting. The hands don't really work. If I bend the arm, the hand will kind of go out of place, which is probably just an artifact of how I modeled it. But you know what? It's good enough and I can use it for basic posing. Now, I knew that I wanted this shoot to be in a basketball court, so that's what I did next. I had a bitumen texture that I'd made before. There's a really good tutorial that I'll There's a really good tutorial that I'll link for how to make seamless textures. And then I just like drew on the core in texture paint. I could have done this way cleaner in Photopia, but I was a little bit lazy, but also I kind of just like the hand-drawn aesthetic of it. It's not perfect. It's kind of like childlike, and I mess with it. It's cool. The hoops are just like a cylinder and a cube and then a torus. I kept it relatively low poly because that's how I roll, but that was easy enough to model and then duplicate. And then I had to kind of start going with the background. With the Wii Sports Resort image on my second monitor, I started building up like the concrete buffer that's around the court. I started building up the fence around the court as well. I used like one pole and then did an array modifier to make the ones around the outside, so that instead of having to have a bunch of individual objects, it was just an array that takes care of it. That's a handy little trick. Here I do some super basic lighting and also place a camera in the scene. This is just so I can get a feel for what I will need to build in the background. I could build like a whole city square around it, but that would take a lot of time and effort for something that, you know, I'm only gonna have a certain view of. So if I can get an idea of what I need to do, then that'll save a lot of time. I also have a go at doing a arms crossed pose, but because of my sort of laid back approach to rigging, it doesn't really work. The hand goes everywhere as I predicted, which is fine. I'll get better at that. I ended up going for kind of like a cool laid back pose like this, which I still really like. I think it came out really cool and I don't have to worry about the hands doing their own thing. I built a really simple road going around the corner here. I'm not entirely sure why. I had to have known that it wouldn't show up in the final render, but I guess, you know what, it gave me an idea of where the buildings need to be placed, which will be in the final render. These buildings are coming straight out of Woohoo Island. I don't want to have to be a city planner as well as a modeler, so shout out to the team that actually modeled that for, I'm going to Google it. Shout out to Hirotake, Otsubo, and the team for doing 3D design. You guys are doing God's work. I used to have this notion that if you took literally any amount of inspiration from anyone else's work, it somehow detracted from your work. Like it somehow cheapened it. And I'm not talking about taking like an artist's work and slapping like a filter on it and going like, hey, this is mine. I was like, if I had any amount of inspiration, I'd be like, this isn't worth it, I'm plagiarizing. Which is, I hope it's obvious, a really stupid idea. I was worried about vibe plagiarism. The thought that like any bit of subconscious inspiration was taken from anywhere else made my work somehow derivative. That really turned me off of doing anything creative for a long time. I kind of had this idea that, oh, whatever, if it's not all me, if it's not coming from 100% my artist's soul, then what's the point? Yeah, I know, I'm sure this goes without saying, but that's completely idiotic. All painters are painting something. Photography is taking photos of something. Most musical artists aren't creating their own genres for fear of doing something that's been covered ground. It is a completely unobtainable standard to hold yourself to. You know what made the difference for me? That picture, I'll see if I can find it. The holy shit, more cake. Where it's like, oh man, my cake isn't as good as this other guy's cake. And then the audience is like, holy shit, 2 cakes. Like, make another cake. More art is always good. I don't know whether this is just a me thing, but I had to really like unlearn this fear of unoriginality. Even if you're just putting your own spin on something, making something that's derivative is worse than not making anything at all. Making stuff is always good. Here I am shamelessly plagiarizing the work of Hirotake and the gang, when I also decide to leave a little gap between these buildings, which isn't there in the initial design, but I really like the idea of like, ooh, it's a little alley, where could it be going? I know that in reality it's just going into the infinity of the Blender sphere, but it's cool to imagine there's like a little darts club or something back there. I don't know, it has intrigue. You can see me checking the camera view and the render to see what I need to texture with more details. I don't want these buildings to just be like basic brick. I could, but I don't know, it feels kind of boring. UV unwrapping these buildings is super easy because they're literally just boxes. Smart UV project is fine, or even like default unwrap is fine. And I also don't have to worry about any faces that have details going across them because it's just like 6 sides. There's not going to be anything that kind of goes across, not in what I'm doing anyway. So again, I start with a scalable brick texture that I just have in my back pocket. It's good to keep a bunch of infinitely scalable textures on you to do the base layer. And then what I do is I actually do stencil texture painting, which is really, really fun. It's probably my favorite way to texture. I have just like a bunch of pictures from around my neighborhood and from around the city, which isn't that far from me, and all these like ACs and these windows and these doors and these decorations, and so I can just use those as like a stencil and paint them straight onto my buildings. It's really fun. I don't have to go back and forth between Photopia and Blender. I can just use this photography that I have on hand and kind of build from there. It's not stop-starty, it's a really natural process. This might have been my favorite part of the process, and the more pictures that I go out and take, the more reference that I'll have for future. So go out and take pictures. It's fun, and send them to me if you take any cool ones, because I'll use them. So with the background in place and looking pretty nice, I decided to actually finish doing the chain link fence, which I had completely forgotten about. I did this in a lame way. I know, because I just made like a diagonal pole and did another array and duplicated a bunch of times, and then I saw a stupid YouTube short, Blender Noob versus Pro, and it was someone doing exactly what I did versus someone using the skin modifier. Holy, yeah? Someone using the skin modifier, which apparently exists. I'll give that a try, but whatever, don't copy me. This isn't a tutorial, this is a... What is this? A vlog? Post-processing. I told you we'd be coming back to SLK image to pics. I exported all of my frames as images because I wanted to put them back into SLK to get that cool dithering and color palette all over again. This is where that batch functionality is sorely missed. I think like old versions of the program had it and this one doesn't, which is so odd. I, at some point, will probably end up trying to figure out how to make like an auto hotkey script to do this for me, because what I had to do was import everyone and apply the settings and then export the frame manually. I'm not super experienced in AHK. It's something I'll look into if I'm going to do longer form things, because yeah, that was so tedious. But shout out SLK image to pics. Awesome program. Please just let me do multiple images at once. I totally just used an online, like internet PNG to GIF converter to do my final compiling, and that was it. I have my GIF. Check it out. Reflections. This isn't like an introspective reflection thing. This is things that I think I could have done better. Honestly, considering this was like a one pose project, I probably could have saved myself a lot of time and a lot of heartache by just modeling the pose directly and not messing around with like rigging. That way I could have had everything exactly how I wanted and I wouldn't have had to worry about how the rigs are gonna play. I also feel like I lost a bit of the clean, sleek Wii Sports Resort aesthetic that I was going for at the beginning. Just by doing the whole like grungy graffiti thing, it was just by virtue of having those photos. That was the kind of reference material that I had, and I don't want to say I was slipping into old habits. I still think it looks cool. I finished and I was like, oh, the original vision in my head was kind of to have it like this clean, sleek city basketball court thing. So yeah, I guess maybe that's a lesson in just staying on track and not letting your vibe deviate. But also vibe deviation is cool, so whatever. Overall though, I think it came out really sickening. I hope that Een would approve of the album cover. If you know her, maybe let her know. I don't know. I really like the idea of doing these alternate album cover projects. They feel like a really cool way to just like have little stuff that I can put out and have like a vibe to be inspired by. If you know any musicians who you think would like something like this, let me know. Or even better, if you are a musician or like an aspiring one, or even if you have just like made a song, please send it to me. I'd love to work with like smaller artists and do like a collaborative thing. I think that's awesome. But anyway, thank you for watching. I had to show, Frank is literally around in pot plants. I don't know why he's doing this. I gotta show you this. Frank, get out of the pot plant, dude.